Well, yesterday we talked about what went right for the Tigers in 2025, but as we all know, the team that now has the record for biggest blown lead in a division history in Major League Baseball, plenty went wrong. We'll talk about that all today on Locked On Tigers.
You are Locked On Tigers, your daily Detroit Tigers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another edition of Locked On Tigers. I'm, of course, your host, Scott Bentley. Today is Thursday, October 16th, 2025. Thank you so much for making Locked On Tigers your first listen every single day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5. And if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Download the app today. Welcome all, everybody. Happy Thursday here. Today we are going to talk about what went wrong for the Detroit Tigers in 2025, and that's not exactly a short list. Now, this was a weird year where I think there actually was a lot that went right and a lot that went wrong. Some years it's a lot of one or the other, right? There's all, when 2022, when we did this, there was a ton that went wrong and not a whole lot that went right. There's obviously some years that are vice versa. You're just firing on all cylinders. The Brewers, I can't imagine they're going to have a super long list of things that went wrong in the regular season, at least. We'll see how the rest of the postseason plays out. This was just an interesting year for Detroit because I think you could write a novel about both. I think there was so much that went well for this team and also just so much that prevented them from taking even another step forward. And there's a lot of getting in their own way, if you will, on top of all of the positives. So, I mean, obviously this conversation of what went wrong starts and ends with the second half of the season, specifically post-trade deadline. They had the third highest strikeout rate in baseball from the All-Star break to the end of the season. They had the seventh lowest on-base percentage from the All-Star break to the end of the season. It's just simply not good enough and can't happen to a team that was firing on all cylinders, had one of the best records in all of baseball, had the best record in the American League, and had a top 7, 8, 9 offense in baseball, depending on what your starting date is. So that's obviously, again, everyone's going to point to the second half. Everyone's going to point to the last, 6 weeks of the season. That is, again, where this conversation starts. And, if you want to put a bow on it at the end, it's probably the most glaring thing that went wrong as well. But I want to get a little bit more specific in that and not just say, well, the second half, and then, send you off on your Thursday. So the first thing I want to bring up is actually stolen bases. And I talked about this a little bit yesterday, and I will bring this up again throughout the offseason, especially when we start doing our free agent profiles and trade partner, profiles and such that we do in the offseason. This team was dead last in steals. And I know that that's not, you look at that and you go, okay, well, that's not necessarily like guaranteed that you're like a bad baseball team or whatever. That's not a direct correlation necessarily to the elite teams, to the poor teams, but it certainly doesn't help. And I think that it's so interesting with this team specifically. 0 players had a 20 steal season on the Tigers. Zach McKinstry led the team with 19. And the reason why I would like to see it improved is because they are already such a good base running team without speed or stolen base threats. And there's guys like Max Clark, obviously, when he gets called up, he will help in that regard just by like existing, right? But this is not just, you're below average and a guy like that can, maybe get you into the top 10 or something. Like, no, you are the worst in the sport at taking an extra base via steal. And with the new rules in place, I say new, they're a couple seasons old now, obviously, but it has never been easier to steal, and they are more prevalent. Steals are more prevalent than they have been in literal decades. So you're already a great base running team. Think about the how much the advantage would grow even more if this team could have how many more runs they could steal. No pun intended, but kind of very intended. If they had some actual speed and some base stealing ability on the base paths to go with that aggressive base running mindset that has netted them so many runs throughout the course of 162. So that's something I would really like to see improved in the winter, one way or another. Talking about individual players on the offensive side of the ball, obviously we will get to pitching eventually, but I do think that the offense is the most prevalent thing on people's minds here as the season ends, especially with how it looked down the stretch. We'll start with Trey Sweeney, not for any particular reason, just it's a quick conversation. Had the worst WAR on the entire team. Pitchers, hitters, doesn't matter. -1 F4, has a big swing, has a fast bat speed, which is, a good thing if you want to be, a power hitter and have some pop in the bat. But he's a really poor defender that had really poor metrics. Really defensively, really poor metrics offensively. The batted ball data wasn't good, and he'll be 26 years old next year. And something that I say all the time with players is front offices will tell you how they feel about players if you just listen, right? Management, same thing. And Trey Sweeney was a first-round pick that got traded twice. He played for 3 different organizations before even making, I think before he made his major league debut. That the Tigers were his 3rd team, and he was a former first-round pick. So, again, a guy that's going to be 26 next year, it would not shock me in the slightest if Trey Sweeney was the odd man out, depending on how many ads are made to the 40-man roster throughout the winter. But we will keep an eye on that. Another player that I think is probably from because I don't think Trey Sweeney's expectations were that high. They weren't certainly as low as he ended up performing. But a guy that I think had a lot of hype surrounding him going into the year that had a really disappointing and frustrating season is Jace Young. Only 55 plate appearances at the major league level. And honestly, that is part of the issue. Again, you're going to have to walk with me here and go back in time to March and February. And remember that this guy was literally the only true third baseman. I say true third baseman. I guess he was drafted as a second baseman, so that's not quite fair to him. But he was the only third baseman listed third baseman on the roster after Bregman signed with the Red Sox and Veerling got hurt. It was his job and nobody else's. And he still, not only did he still not do well enough in spring training to the point where he didn't even make the team out of camp, despite being the only third baseman listed, third baseman on the roster. He also only played 20 or 21 games at the major league level, and he did extremely poorly in all of those at-bats. Hit a little over 100. I don't think he had a single extra base hit either. He still has not hit a home run at the major league level, and that's one of the reasons that he was drafted was the power at an infield position at second base coming out of Texas Tech. And he also will very quickly be 26 years old next calendar year. So this was honestly a really disappointing year, and I'll be interested to see what happens with him in the offseason. It would not surprise me. Again, it feels quick, but it also based on how the option system works, you kind of got 3 years after adding someone to the 40 to figure it out. And if they're not a mainstay at the major league level, then you kind of have to count your losses. So it'll be really interesting to see what happens with him. Again, we will go way more in depth on literally every single player on the 40-man roster throughout the winter when we do our player review series. And talk about, options remaining, what the future could hold, their advanced analytics and whatever. So we'll save some of those bigger picture stuff for then, but it really wouldn't shock me if he was not on the 40-man roster come spring training. We'll have to see what happens there. But yeah, given the opportunity that was presented to him going into the year, I think this is can really only be viewed as a very underwhelming and disappointing season for Jace Young. Hopefully, there's still something left in the tank there, and he can bounce back next season and in the offseason. Let's keep the ball rolling. I do want to talk a little bit about Matt Vierling, but we got plenty more players and groups and periods of time, if you will, to talk about in this one. We'll do all of that right after this. First, though, going to talk to you all about our friends over at FanDuel. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel has an offer you don't want to miss. Right now, new customers can bet just $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win. That's right. You pick a bet, put down $5, and if it hits, you'll unlock $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. I love how FanDuel gives me so many ways to play. I've built parlays, tried player props, and even followed the live lines during games. It makes watching football even more exciting when you've got a little bit of something riding on the action. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com to download the FanDuel app today and get started. All right, everybody, welcome back here. Segment 2, Locked On Tigers. Appreciate y'all for tuning in, as always, making us your first listen every single day. Shout out to the everydayers that do tune in every day, and we will, of course, be back tomorrow as we continue the off-season content and the off-season episodes here. Still, I'll kind of make it clear when there's a line in the sand of like, okay, we're done talking about 2025. We're only going to talk about 2026. But obviously, we are nowhere close to that day. We are months, maybe plural, away from that day. So going to do a lot more stuff, still reviewing this year and talking about obviously how that affects 2026 and what they need to add, etc. But we'll do, like I said, player reviews, player breakdowns, and plenty more. Once the World Series ends, the offseason gets here pretty quick. You got a lot of deadlines and dates for decisions that the front office has to make in short order. So we'll be on top of all that 5 days a week still, baby, all throughout the offseason. Talking about what went wrong for the Tigers in 2025. As always, we do an episode of what went right. We literally did it yesterday, okay? If you're only finding this one, I promise I'm not all like negative Nelly and I just want to talk about everything that went wrong. We did a full 32 minutes, whatever it was, of what went right on yesterday's show. You can go watch that. Matt Vierling, talked about him a little bit before the break there. It's not really his fault per se, but just disappointing because he barely played. And when he did play, he honestly wasn't very effective. Given the fact that he was one of the more valuable position players literally on the whole roster in 2024, having him not play at all, especially with no one filling that void at third base, whether it's free agency, internal, we already talked about Young, obviously. It really sucked to get, quite literally nothing out of him in 2025. That is certainly disappointing to say the least. But again, not necessarily like all on him. Injuries are weird. Speaking of weird injuries, Parker Meadows, just an incredibly disappointing season. I did nothing but gas this dude up all of last winter, all of heading into spring training, and he just had an incredibly disappointing season. The injury to start the year got off on the wrong foot, a nerve issue that I have literally never seen before. AJ Hinch said the same thing in the postseason, a press conference, like has never seen or heard of a nerve just deciding it was going to shut down temporarily. So like you have that snowballs into him just completely looking like neutralized at the plate. Zero threat to really do much of anything. A 621 OPS, a pretty darn high strikeout rate, especially in the latter half of the year. That's just not going to cut it. Still a good walk rate if you're looking for anything to hang your hat on here. Still has a lot of speed, obviously. Still is a plus defender. But it really doesn't matter if he's going to have a low 600s OPS at the plate. And we've seen glimpses of a really, really good and valuable ball player at times in his major league tenure. We also have a really large sample size of him not being able to hit water if he fell out of a boat. And like that is that is going to be the biggest question mark with him heading into 2025 or 2026 rather. And honestly, it already is somewhat of a question about what you do in center field this winter. Do you bring in someone else? Do you just ride Meadows until Clark is ready? Does Clark make a run even for like center field early in the season? Because there's a lot of different avenues they could go with center field. It's obviously not going to be Riley Green ever again. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. But yeah, the thing that frustrates me about Parker Meadows, aside from just the fact that, again, I was super, super high on him going into this year and obviously missed the mark on that one. I talked about him a lot over the winter, but he doesn't even have to be an elite hitter to be extremely valuable. Now, he has to stay on the field and be a far better hitter than he was this year. And again, he's been hurt a ton in his career and only has like 2.5, 3 months of being a really good major league hitter under his belt. But when he does do both of those things, he is, literally one of, if not the most valuable position player on the team. So it's just a high enough ceiling for me where it's even more of a gut punch when he has a disappointing season like this. So we'll talk a lot more about Parker Meadows throughout the winter. I'm sure he'll be a big topic of conversation during the offseason. Want to talk about some other guys. Andy Ibanez. I think it's fair to put him on this side of things. Not that he was terrible by any stretch, but like his OPS against left-handed pitchers dropped dang near 100 points. It was over 800 against lefties. In 2024, it was just over 700 in 2025. And honestly, there was he was so struggling so much he got demoted at one point, least we forget. So I'm really interested in what his future on the roster looks like as well. His only value really is that he hits lefties and he's a platoon hitter. And on top of that, I guess he plays multiple positions. None of them super well, but you can stick him at multiple positions. So, he can kind of be that platoon bat for half the lineup. I guess that is the value in him. But if that number continues to slide, then really all of his value goes away. So I'm interested to see if he makes it through the winter as well. You obviously have the guys that just had good first halves and poor second halves, Gleyber Torres, Wenceel Perez, Zach McKinstry, right? Those are really easy to point out. We don't have too much else to say about that. And then similar to yesterday, I'll just bring up again the same group of guys that I think there's quite a lot of good and quite a lot of bad that you can discuss within them. And so we'll kind of dive deeper, at least, more detail wise in our deep dives. But Riley Green is certainly in that category. Colt Keith, I think, is in that category. Javi Baez is certainly in there. Even to an extent, Kerry Carpenter, I think, is in that conversation. So it doesn't really feel right to me to put them in either, but I'm sure some people, do have a strong feeling on whether to put them in either one. But I just think there's too much nuance with those guys to really draw a line in the sand either way. Pitching, we mentioned the starting rotation yesterday on what went right. It had a pretty solid year, but again, as mentioned then, even a lot of those metrics are being carried pretty heavily by having the best pitcher in the sport. Paddock and Morton were both obviously brutal additions. And Scott Harris saying in the press conference, the postseason press conference, that they weren't acquired with the intent of starting or even pitching in playoff games is just absolutely wild to me. They gave up a top 15 prospect in the organization for Chris Paddock, dude. Now, prospect rankings don't mean anything, okay? These front offices all have their own prospect rankings that they value far more than, a free website. I totally understand that. That's not the end all be all. I say that all the time on this show, but you didn't give up nothing. And I just, that doesn't make it better to me. That he's oh yeah, if anything, that makes it even worse that they went out of their way to give up assets for these guys that they knew weren't going to be factors in October. Other starting pitchers outside of those two, Sawyer Gipson Long, man. This is one that I think really kind of flew under the radar throughout the year. This was a guy everybody, myself included, was really excited to see this year, finally healthy and back after, obviously the Tommy John surgery, missed a ton of time, had a back injury as well. And I wanted to see what we saw from him in 2023 that made everybody really optimistic about his future. And he just didn't have it, man. The ERA was over 8 as a starting pitcher. It was still over 6 as a reliever, too. So didn't really have it in any capacity, no matter what his role was. There's still stuff that I like. The velocity on the fastball is fine. The changeup, I still believe, is a plus pitch. It looks great out of the hand. It has good numbers. But my only hope really here, and as I say all the time on this show, like, hope is not a strategy. But my hope is that he has a plan and a strategy going into this winter, and that a full, just normal, healthy camp and off season can get him back to where he was for 2026. Because the outlook of this pitching staff, I think, honestly changes a lot with him right and where we believed he could have been, a year and a half, 2 years ago. So someone to keep an eye out for this offseason. Let's talk about the bullpen. That was kind of a catastrophe this year. We'll talk about that right after this. First, though, got to talk to y'all about our friends over at Prize Picks. This episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Every day we make decisions, but on Prize Picks, being right can actually get you paid. So don't miss the excitement of this football season with Prize Picks, where it's good to be right. Playing Prize Picks is such a fun, simple way to add more excitement to football. You just pick more or less based on player projections like Josh Allen's passing yards or Saquon Barkley rushing for a touchdown, and all of a sudden you're in the game. I love how quick it is. You can make your lineup in under a minute. And my favorite part is Prize Picks just added stacks. So if I want to ride with a player, I can select their passing yards, rushing yards, and touchdowns all in one lineup, and the new injury reboot feature. If your player leaves early and doesn't return, it won't count against you. So download the Prize Picks app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB to get $50 off in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONMLB for $50 in lineups after your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, it's good to be right. All right, everybody, welcome back here. Third and final segment of Locked On Tigers. Appreciate y'all for tuning in as always. Let's talk about this bullpen that I absolutely despise this year, man. I've waited to really kind of fully open the curtains, I guess, on my feelings, but I just got to come out and say it, man. This bullpen drove me up a wall this year. I almost everybody that took the mound pissed me off at some point. I thought it was wildly ineffective. And for a team that was so incredible in the bullpen in 2024, to have them be this bad in 2025 was a complete and utter failure to me. It wasn't just bad. It wasn't just, like I said earlier, catastrophic even. This was, in my eyes, a failure. They had the 24th bullpen WAR in baseball. Their bullpen ERA on the season was over 4. They had, and this is the part that kills me, it's such a massive problem. They had the worst reliever strikeout rate in all of baseball. Okay, I understand to an extent getting an out is an out. A, they didn't really do that very well. But B, far more importantly, we talk about with this Tigers offense, how they strike out too much and swing and miss too much. And in late game, high leverage situations, those are almost always against relievers. With runners on base, they strike out and they whiff. Well, that is also why this bullpen sucked this year. They have 0 swing and miss. You can't have it both ways. You can't acknowledge that the offense needs to put the bat on the ball more and not strike out as much, while also realizing that your bullpen wasn't good and they also didn't strike anybody out. I wonder why. I genuinely think that this bullpen needs. I'm debating saying a total rehaul. And the reason I'm not is because, like, if they re-signed Finnegan, I wouldn't be mad. If Brant Herter was back, I would not be mad. If Will Vest is back, I would not be mad. But we're talking about three guys. How many relievers did the Tigers use this year? 12, 13, 15? It's brutal, man. It was such a frustrating year out of the bullpen, and nobody can strike anybody out. And I think that that's the root cause of all of it. You need so many new relievers, so many. If this bullpen even looks remotely close to how it did just personnel wise in 2025, obviously talking about 2026, I will go scorched earth. I it will be an inexcusable offense by this front office. Individuals this year that fall under this umbrella here. Bo Brisky, really rough season, sent down to AAA, had a really rough season in AAA even, and got injured. So just kind of had, really nothing going right for him on the mound, unfortunately, in 2025. Now, hopefully he can get fully healthy and get back out there. Jason Foley, obviously injured as well, will miss this season. Now, 2024, Foley was the best reliever in baseball for the first 6 weeks of the 2024 season. Then he randomly lost 5 miles an hour of velocity and was okay, but he wasn't great. He was fine. And then this year, he misses the entire season and is obviously has the elbow injury. So that's those are arguably your two best relievers in 2024, dude. Bo Brisky was this team's closer in the Houston series in the wild card round in 2024, and Foley was your closer in the regular season. I don't know. Those are huge, two massive losses that cannot be overlooked. Probably the most disappointing single player in the entire bullpen, however, is Tyler Holton. This wasn't a complete catastrophe. He wasn't a complete failure. He had a 3.2 ERA. Now, a lot of that is being held together by duct tape and paper mache because of a really good last month of the season. His ERA was around 4 for most of the year. And that's why he ended with exactly 0 FWAR. Just a net 0 player over 162. He also has very little to no swing and miss. And I think that's a big reason for that. He still does well against lefties. He can still go multiple innings. He has value. I'm not saying you kick him to the curb. He can be in that group with, Herter and Vest. And if they want to re-sign Finnegan, I'm fine. If they don't, I'm kind of also fine, whatever. But for a guy that literally got an MVP vote in 2024 and from the start of 2023 up until game 162 in 2024 was legitimately one of the most valuable relievers in all of baseball over that 2-season long stretch, I think this is pretty objectively an underwhelming season. Tommy Kahnle, a weird year, was unstoppable for the first 3 months and then just completely lost it. The numbers improved after July. I understand that his July ERA was 20, okay, and they were better, but they never even got close to where they were in the first half. And obviously we saw that at the end of the season and into the postseason. And then you just have the revolving door of bleh that happened throughout the year. That's where most of the bullpen kind of falls into, to be honest. Carlos Hernandez, Dietrich Enns, who actually found a new home and did really well. John Brebbia, brutal. Chase Lee, meh. ERA in the mid-4s. Cater Montero as a reliever. We talked about how good he was as a starter. That also comes in the same breath as talking about how he was one of the least effective relief pitchers on the entire roster this year. So just not good enough, man. That's what, 5 or 6 guys that are part of a revolving door. You have a handful of other guys that are kind of whatever, meh, could go either way. Just not a very good bullpen this year. Obviously, signings, Kenta Maeda, that was 2 years ago, I know, but, didn't make it through the season. And then Alex Cobb is widely, as everybody knows, is a huge failure of a signing. That's $15 million. He did not throw a single pitch for the Detroit Tigers in 2025. He was debating retiring a year ago, got a 1-year, $15 million contract from the Tigers, and now is debating retiring yet again. I'd imagine he will. Either way, I give him all the credit in the world for trying, man. He took it very personally and did not quit on the organization. And talked about how he felt like he had a responsibility is the word I'm looking for, that he owed this team. Like, hey, they're cutting me a check for a lot of money. I'm not just going to be like, oh, like, I was hurt in the first half, I'm going to retire. He tried, man. He tried. And so wishing him the best with whatever happens down the road. But I'd imagine it won't be for the Tigers organization. The trade deadline, obviously, I've brought this up so much. I don't even want to talk about it too much more. I also want to make this clear. For as much as I complain and whine and moan about the deadline, it also doesn't. It's not the only reason. Like that is not the only reason that they had the collapse. It's just like, oh, they didn't trade anybody at the deadline. The players that were already here were terrible for 6 weeks. We already talked about some of the collapses, but like then you talk about the core players. Riley Green took a massive step back in the second half. Right? Spencer Torkelson's OPS was well over 800 the first 100 games and ended below 790. Like Kerry Carpenter had an OBP under 300, an OPS under 800 going into the end of the season. Like there are a lot, and I just mentioned the bullpen. You might be able to just single-handedly single out in that regard. Like this is not just, oh, they didn't make any trades at the deadline and that just ruined the team by itself. No, the players that were already here completely pissed down their leg as well. And I think that that's important to remember. I don't want to make it all about the deadline, as disappointing as I think it was. So more moves should have been made. I don't care about how bad some of the other relievers that were traded at the deadline, ended up being, or how below expectations they ended up being. Like, this was literally one of the worst bullpens in baseball this year. Anything would have been help and would have been an upgrade. And then injuries, really the only other thing. This was one of the most injured teams in baseball this year. That's not nothing. That does matter. So I want to make sure I highlight that as well. So yeah, to put a bow on this and send you off on your Thursday, like, I mean, there's enough red flags here where like it justifies pessimism to me. Like if that's the route you want to take about how you feel about the Tigers' future, I'm not going to get in the way of that or tell you you're wrong, especially if Skubal walks for nothing. I mean, no matter what side of the aisle you're on, whether it's extending him long-term or trading him, I think we can all agree that worst case scenario is you get one more year out of him and then he walks and you don't do anything. So like, I mean, if that happens as well, I really don't blame people for being worried about what the future may hold. Now, what I said yesterday is still true. I still think there's plenty of reasons to be optimistic. I've meant everything I've said in both of these episodes. I'm not just like playing devil's advocate. Like I think there's a lot of good and bad here in 2025. And I still think the organization is heading in a positive direction long-term, I guess. But there is also certainly still enough again, that worries me. And there's enough on this list of things that went wrong heading into the offseason that if that is not addressed, or if a lot of these things are not addressed, then I think it would not surprise me if a lot more people started kind of jumping from that ship of optimism and started viewing it as more of a worried type of mindset. So yeah, there you go. What went wrong in 2025. Thanks for making Locked On Tigers your first listen every single day. Shout out to the everydayers that do tune in every day. We'll be back tomorrow. Got a lot more to talk about, obviously, and we will see what this team does this winter to make us more confident in the optimist within us and this team. All right. Peace and love. Going to therapy's dope, and I'll catch y'all tomorrow, baby. Go Tigers.